What if the greatest battle you will ever fight isn't against your circumstances, your enemies, or the world around you, but against your own mind? 90% of people drift through life. They react to whatever comes their way. They let their habits, fears, and emotions steer the ship. They never consciously decide what to think, what to want, or who to become, and most of them never realize it. Napoleon Hill spent over 20 years interviewing the wealthiest, most successful people in American history: Andrew Carnegie, Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, John D. Rockefeller, and he discovered something remarkable. Their greatest common quality wasn't genius, luck, or privilege. It was this: they had learned to own their own minds. The mind is the only thing over which any human being has complete and unchallengeable control. Today, we're going deep into one of Napoleon Hill's lesser-known but enormously powerful books, How to Own Your Own Mind. This isn't a casual read. It's a manual, a blueprint for gaining absolute mastery over your thoughts, decisions, and creative powers. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why most people never reach their potential, and more importantly, what you can do about it. Let's get into it. Before we dive into the ideas, it's worth understanding who Napoleon Hill was, because his story is itself a lesson in the principles he taught. Hill was born in 1883 in a one-room log cabin in rural Virginia. His mother died when he was 9 years old. By every measure, he started with nothing. Yet by his 40s, he had interviewed over 500 of the most successful men in America, distilled their wisdom, and produced what would become one of the best-selling self-help books of all time, Think and Grow Rich. But Think and Grow Rich was a finished product, polished, simplified for a mass audience. How to Own Your Own Mind, compiled from Hill's personal papers and lectures by his editor Don Green, is something rawer and richer. It's closer to Hill's original conversations with Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate who commissioned Hill to spend 20 years unlocking the secrets of achievement. This book is structured as a series of imagined dialogues between Hill and Carnegie, where Carnegie explains, challenges, and expands Hill's understanding of the human mind. It reads like a masterclass in thinking itself. So with that context set, let's explore the three foundational pillars of the book: creative vision, organized thought, and controlled attention. Pillar 1. Creative vision. The first great faculty Hill explores is what he calls creative vision, and he's very careful to distinguish it from mere imagination or daydreaming. Hill describes two types of imagination. The first is synthetic imagination, taking existing ideas, concepts, and plans and rearranging them into new combinations. This is the imagination most people use most of the time. It's useful, but it's limited because it only works with what already exists. The second type, and far more powerful, is creative imagination. This is the capacity to receive entirely new ideas, hunches, and insights that seem to come from nowhere. Hill believed this was the faculty through which inventors, artists, and business visionaries received their greatest breakthroughs. He pointed to Edison, who would sit quietly for hours, almost in a trance, waiting for ideas to arrive. He pointed to Carnegie himself, who described certain flashes of insight that seemed to transcend ordinary thinking. Creative vision is not a gift reserved for a chosen few. It is a faculty of the mind that can be deliberately cultivated by anyone willing to do the work. But here's the key insight, and it's one that separates Hill's philosophy from simple wishful thinking. Creative vision must be paired with a burning desire and a definite purpose. The vision without the purpose is fantasy. The purpose without the vision is mere labor. Together, they become unstoppable. Carnegie tells Hill a story in the book about a young engineer who had an extraordinary vision for a steel processing method that would cut costs in half. But he kept the vision to himself, afraid of being ridiculed. He never committed to a definite purpose around it. He never organized a plan. And eventually, another man, with less vision but more decisiveness, invented something similar and made a fortune. The lesson Carnegie draws is brutal in its clarity. A vision you don't act on is worse than no vision at all, because it shows you the gap between where you are and where you could be, and then you live with that gap for the rest of your life. So how do you develop creative vision? Hill gives us a process. Step 1. Feed your mind constantly with new information, new experiences, and deep study of your chosen field. Creative vision grows in a well-nourished mind. Step 2. Practice silence and solitude. Not passive rest, but active quiet, the kind where you put aside the noise of daily life and simply sit with a focused question or problem. Step 3. Write down every idea that comes to you, no matter how wild or unfinished it seems. The act of writing externalizes the thought, making it real and giving your mind permission to elaborate on it. Step 4. Review your ideas regularly and look for connections between them. Creative breakthroughs often come not from a single new idea, but from the unexpected connection between two existing ones. Hill argues that most people never develop creative vision not because they lack the capacity, but because they live too fast, too reactively, too distracted to access the deeper levels of thought where real creativity lives. In the modern age, with smartphones and social media and infinite entertainment at our fingertips, this warning has never been more urgent. We have more stimulation than any generation in history and less silence. And silence, Hill says, is where the greatest ideas are born. Pillar 2. Organized thought. The second pillar of the book is organized thought, and this is where Hill gets almost technical in his precision. He begins with a devastating observation. Most people think in fragments. They have flashes of ideas, incomplete plans, vague ambitions, and scattered opinions. They confuse activity with progress and busyness with purpose. They react to problems instead of solving them systematically. And because their thinking is disorganized, their results are disorganized too. Carnegie explains that organized thought is not just about being logical. It's about having a system for how you approach any significant decision, goal, or challenge. And the core of that system is what Hill calls the mastermind principle. No two minds ever come together without thereby creating a third, invisible, intangible force, which may be likened to a third mind. Napoleon Hill. The mastermind is the concept of two or more people working together in perfect harmony toward a definite goal. But in this book, Hill goes deeper than the surface-level interpretation most people know. He explains that a mastermind alliance is not just a team meeting or a brainstorming session. It requires something rarer, genuine alignment of purpose, mutual trust, and the willingness to subordinate personal ego to collective intelligence. Carnegie tells Hill that every major achievement of his career, the building of U.S. Steel, the creation of his vast industrial empire, was made possible not by his personal genius, but by his ability to coordinate the mental energies of brilliant people around a single definite aim. Carnegie says, and this is remarkable, that his own knowledge of steel was quite limited. What he understood was minds. He knew how to find the right minds, how to align them, and how to unlock the best from each of them. That, he says, is organized thought at the highest level. But Hill doesn't stop at the mastermind. He also breaks down the mechanics of organized individual thinking, how a single person can bring discipline and structure to their own mental processes. He identifies several mental habits that consistently produce disorganized thought: procrastination, the inability to make decisions, the habit of surrendering to doubt and fear, and the tendency to be swayed by the opinions of others. And he proposes a specific antidote to each. Against procrastination, the habit of immediate, decisive action, not reckless impulsiveness, but the discipline to act on a well-considered plan without unnecessary delay. Against indecision, a clear hierarchy of values. Hill observed that people who struggle to make decisions usually lack a defined set of priorities. They can't decide because they don't know what matters most to them. The cure is to define your major purpose so clearly that every significant decision becomes easier, because you simply ask, does this serve my purpose or doesn't it? Against doubt and fear, what Hill calls faith, not religious faith necessarily, but a trained psychological state of confident expectation. He argues that just as doubt and fear are habits of thinking, so too is faith, and habits can be deliberately formed. Against outside opinion, the development of what he calls independent judgment. Hill is blunt here. Most people's opinions are not their own. They are inherited from their parents, absorbed from their culture, or adopted to fit in with the crowd. True organized thought requires that you examine your beliefs regularly, discard those that cannot withstand scrutiny, and form new ones based on evidence and reason. There's a passage in the book where Carnegie challenges Hill directly, asking him to defend one of his own beliefs. Hill begins to argue his position, and Carnegie systematically dismantles it with questions, not to humiliate Hill, but to show him that the belief he had held for years had no solid foundation. It was simply something he had been told as a child and never questioned. Carnegie's point: most of what we think is our thinking is actually other people's thinking that we've accepted without examination. Organized thought begins with intellectual honesty, the courage to ask, is this actually true? Or is this just what I've always believed? Pillar 3. Controlled attention. The third pillar, and Hill argues the most powerful of all, is controlled attention. Here is how Hill defines it. Controlled attention is the act of coordinating all the faculties of the mind and directing them toward a specific, chosen end, voluntarily, on demand, and with sustained focus. This is not simply concentration in the ordinary sense. Hill is talking about something deeper. He observed that the great achievers he studied had a remarkable capacity to become completely absorbed in their chosen work, to the point where the outside world ceased to exist. Edison was famous for working 18 hours straight without noticing the time. Carnegie could sit in a meeting for 6 hours working through a single complex business problem without fatigue. Ford could focus on a mechanical challenge with such intensity that solutions seemed to come to him from a source beyond ordinary reasoning. Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve, but only if all the powers of the mind are directed toward that conception with controlled, sustained attention. Hill argues that controlled attention is the multiplier that makes everything else work. Creative vision gives you the idea. Organized thought gives you the plan. But controlled attention is what drives the execution. It's what turns potential into reality. And here is the most sobering part of this section. Hill believed that most people possess all the raw mental material they need to achieve remarkable things. The limiting factor is almost never intelligence or talent. It is the inability to direct and sustain attention. He points to a simple but profound observation. Watch what a person pays attention to in their spare time, and you will know exactly what they value. Not what they say they value, what they actually value. Because attention is not neutral. It is the currency of the mind, and wherever you spend it, that is where your life goes. The person who spends their attention on complaint, gossip, and entertainment will produce a life that reflects those investments. The person who deliberately directs their attention to their purpose, their craft, and their growth will produce a life that reflects those investments instead. It sounds simple. It is not easy, because the mind, left undirected, is pulled constantly by the immediate, the comfortable, and the stimulating. Controlling attention means overriding those pulls, again and again, every day, and redirecting the mind back to what matters. Hill describes a practice he calls the daily inventory, a habit of reviewing each day's mental activity. He suggests asking 3 questions at the end of every day. Where did my attention go today? Was that where I consciously chose to direct it? And what can I do differently tomorrow? Over time, this practice builds what he calls mental discipline, the trained capacity to put your mind exactly where you want it, for as long as you need it there, without wavering. He also discusses what he calls the negative application of controlled attention, the way that fears, worries, and obsessions represent a kind of involuntary controlled attention. A person paralyzed by fear of failure is actually using enormous mental energy, but they're directing it toward what they don't want, not what they do want. Hill argues that the mechanism is the same. The difference is only in the direction. This is one of the most powerful insights in the entire book. You already have the capacity for deep, sustained focus. You prove it every time you worry intensely about something. The question is whether you will choose to deploy that same capacity toward your goals, or continue to let fear and habit choose for you. The role of emotion and desire. One of the most nuanced parts of the book deals with the relationship between emotion and thought, and Hill's treatment of this is more sophisticated than you might expect from a book written almost a century ago. Hill does not tell you to suppress your emotions. He does not advocate cold, robotic rationality. Instead, he makes a distinction that is crucial. Emotions are the fuel of human achievement. The problem is not that people feel too much. It is that they let their emotions drive the vehicle instead of powering it. Carnegie explains it with a memorable analogy. Imagine a powerful steam engine. The steam, the raw emotional energy, is what makes the engine run. Without it, nothing moves. But if the steam has no direction, no controlled channels, no pistons and valves to harness it, you don't get a locomotive. You get an explosion. Desire, in particular, is the emotion Hill focuses on most intensely. He argues that a burning, obsessive desire, a desire so strong it dominates your thoughts when you wake up and when you fall asleep, is the single most important ingredient in any great achievement. Not education, not talent, not connections, desire. But he is careful to distinguish between mere wishing and genuine burning desire. Most people wish they were wealthier, healthier, more successful. They want those things the way they want pleasant weather. It would be nice, but they're not going to rearrange their life around it. Burning desire is different. It's the feeling that you cannot be content with anything less than your goal, that you are willing to pay any price, persist through any obstacle, endure any criticism. Hill observed that this kind of desire cannot be manufactured artificially. It has to come from somewhere authentic, from a deep alignment between your goals and your deepest values, which is why he places such emphasis on finding and committing to your definite major purpose. He also addresses the destructive emotions, fear, envy, hatred, jealousy, with remarkable psychological insight. He argues that these emotions are not inherently bad. They are signals. Fear, for instance, is the mind's way of alerting you to something it perceives as dangerous. The mistake is to let the signal become the destination, to live inside the fear rather than processing it, learning from it, and moving through it. The person who owns their own mind does not pretend to have no fear. They feel fear, and they act anyway. They feel doubt, and they gather more information and decide anyway. They feel the pull of envy, and they use it as a pointer toward their own unrealized desires, then redirect that energy into action. The danger of drifting. Now let's talk about what Hill considers the greatest enemy of mental ownership, the habit he calls drifting. A drifter, in Hill's terminology, is not necessarily a lazy or unintelligent person. A drifter is someone who has never made the conscious decision to take command of their own mind. They go where life takes them. They accept the circumstances they are born into as fixed. They adopt the opinions around them without examination. They make decisions based on what feels comfortable rather than what serves their purpose. Hill's portrait of the drifter is uncomfortably recognizable, and it should be, because he argues that the tendency to drift is the default setting of the human mind. Without deliberate intervention, without a conscious commitment to self-direction, every human being drifts. It requires no effort to drift. It requires enormous effort not to. Drifting is the most common cause of failure. Not poverty, not lack of education, not bad luck. Drifting. Hill lists the signs of drifting with precision. The drifter changes their plans frequently, not because they've gathered new information, but because they've lost confidence in the current plan. The drifter is easily influenced by other people's opinions, especially negative ones. The drifter looks for shortcuts and easy answers. The drifter blames circumstances, other people, and luck for their outcomes. The drifter has no burning desire, or if they do, they are not willing to pay the price it demands. And perhaps most tellingly, the drifter never makes definite decisions. They drift into relationships, drift into careers, drift into habits, and then look around one day and wonder how they got there. The antidote to drifting is what Hill calls a definite major purpose, a clear, specific, deeply desired goal that serves as the organizing principle of all your mental energy. Not a vague aspiration like, I want to be successful or I want to be happy, but a precise, concrete aim with a deadline, a plan, and a price you are willing to pay for it. Hill is insistent on the word definite. Vague goals produce vague results. A definite goal programs the mind, consciously and unconsciously, to recognize and pursue every opportunity, resource, and idea that serves it. It gives your creative vision a target. It gives your organized thought a direction, and it gives your controlled attention a purpose worth fighting to maintain. Carnegie explains to Hill that he had been thinking about his definite major purpose since he was a teenager working in a cotton factory. Every experience, every relationship, every obstacle was filtered through that purpose, not consciously in every moment, but structurally, at the level of how he made decisions. It was the master key that organized everything else. Owning your mind in practice. So far, we've covered the philosophical and psychological architecture of the book. Now let's talk about what all of this looks like in daily practice, because Hill is not content with giving you inspiring ideas. He wants you to act. The first and most fundamental practice Hill recommends is the daily cultivation of a written, definite major purpose statement. Not a goal you keep vaguely in your head, but a written declaration, in precise language, of exactly what you intend to achieve, by when, and what you are willing to give in return for it. He recommends reading this statement aloud, morning and evening, with as much emotional intensity as you can bring to it. This practice might sound strange in the modern age, even a little theatrical. But Hill's reasoning is grounded in what we now understand about the brain's reticular activating system, the neural network that acts as a filter, determining what information your conscious mind pays attention to. When you repeatedly and vividly focus on a specific goal, you literally reprogram this filter to alert you to relevant information, opportunities, and resources that you would otherwise overlook. The second practice is what Hill calls the mastermind meeting, a regular, structured gathering with a small group of trusted people who share your vision and whose intelligence and skills complement your own. Hill is specific. This group should meet regularly, operate with complete candor, and hold each member accountable to their stated purposes and commitments. The third practice is the cultivation of what Hill calls going the extra mile, consistently delivering more value than you are paid for or expected to provide. This is not naivety or self-sacrifice. It is strategy. Hill argues that the person who habitually delivers more than expected positions themselves, over time, as irreplaceable. They develop a reputation, a track record, and a level of self-respect that creates compounding returns. The fourth practice is what Hill calls applied faith, the habit of acting as if your goal is already achieved, with complete confidence, while simultaneously doing everything in your power to make it real. This sounds paradoxical. It is not. Applied faith is the opposite of complacency. It is the psychological state of someone who has made a total commitment, who has burned the bridges of retreat, and who therefore moves through obstacles with a determination that those who haven't made that commitment simply cannot access. The fifth practice, and in some ways the most demanding, is what Hill calls self-discipline, the ongoing, daily practice of commanding your own thoughts, words, and actions in accordance with your definite purpose. Not perfectly, not all at once, but consistently and with increasing mastery over time. Hill is honest that self-discipline is not achieved once and then maintained automatically. It must be practiced daily, like a muscle, and there will be days, many of them, when the old habits of drifting, reacting, and avoiding reassert themselves. The person who owns their own mind does not aim for perfection. They aim for consistent return to their purpose, return to their discipline, return to intentional thought, again and again, every day. Why this book matters now more than ever. Napoleon Hill wrote the ideas in this book in the 1930s, in conversations with Andrew Carnegie, a man who built his fortune in the industrial age of the late 1800s. And yet, if you read How to Own Your Own Mind today, you will find that its central warnings have become more urgent, not less. We live in the most attention-saturated era in human history. Every app, every notification, every platform, every piece of content is designed by some of the smartest engineers and psychologists alive to capture and hold your attention, not for your benefit, but for theirs. The economy of the 21st century is, at its core, an attention economy. And your attention is the product being sold. In this environment, the capacity to own your own mind, to choose what you think about, to direct your attention deliberately, to form your own opinions through your own reasoning, is not just a philosophy of personal development. It is a form of freedom. perhaps the most important form of freedom available to a modern person. Hill could not have foreseen smartphones or social media or the algorithmic news feed, but he understood the fundamental human tendency to drift, to surrender the direction of the mind to whatever is most immediately stimulating, most socially comfortable, most effortlessly available. He understood that this tendency is the default, and that overcoming it requires conscious, sustained effort. If anything, his prescription is more relevant today than it was in his time, because the forces pulling us toward mental drift have never been more powerful, more sophisticated, or more omnipresent. Owning your own mind in 2025 means doing what it always has, choosing your purpose deliberately, cultivating your attention carefully, thinking your own thoughts rather than absorbing those manufactured for you, and committing to daily practice of mental discipline, even when, especially when, 1,000 stimulating alternatives are one tap away. Let's bring this all together. Here are the core lessons of how to own your own mind. Lesson 1. Your mind is the only thing in this universe over which you have complete, unchallengeable control, but only if you consciously claim that control. If you don't, habit, environment, and other people's opinions will claim it for you. Lesson 2. Creative vision, the capacity to imagine possibilities beyond current reality, is a faculty that can be deliberately developed through silence, solitude, consistent study, and the habit of recording and revisiting your ideas. Lesson 3. Organized thought, the ability to think systematically, make clear decisions, and coordinate intelligence toward a specific goal, requires a clear, definite major purpose, the mastermind principle, and the courage to examine and revise your own beliefs. Lesson 4. Controlled attention, the sustained, voluntary direction of all your mental faculties toward your chosen aim, is the ultimate multiplier of human potential. It separates those who drift from those who achieve, and it is a trainable skill, not an innate talent. Lesson 5. Emotion is fuel, not direction. The burning desire for your goal is essential, but it must be harnessed by thought and channeled by discipline, not allowed to drive without a steering wheel. Lesson 6. Drifting, the failure to take conscious command of your mind, is the most common cause of human failure. The antidote is a definite major purpose, held with burning desire, pursued through organized, consistent action. Lesson 7. Owning your mind is not a destination. It is a daily practice, a continuous act of return, of choosing your thoughts, guarding your attention, and committing to your purpose again and again every single day. Before I close, I want to ask you one question, and I want you to really sit with it. If someone followed you around for a week and observed every choice you made about where to direct your attention, what would they conclude your definite major purpose is? Not what you say it is, not what you wish it were, but what your actual behavior, the thing you spend your time, your energy, your mental focus on, reveals it to be. For most people, the honest answer to that question is uncomfortable, because most people's revealed priorities are not their stated priorities. Their attention goes to distraction, to worry, to the consumption of other people's content, to the maintenance of familiar routines, while their stated goals sit quietly on the shelf, waiting. Napoleon Hill's message, delivered through 20 years of research and distilled in this remarkable book, is that this gap does not have to be permanent. The mind is the most powerful instrument in the known universe, and you own one. The only question is whether you will choose to take command of it. You either run the day or the day runs you. Jim Rohn. How to Own Your Own Mind is not a book you read once and forget. It is a book you return to when you find yourself drifting, when your focus is scattered, when you need to remember what it actually means to think for yourself. Keep it close. If this video gave you value, please hit like and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel grow and allows me to keep bringing you breakdowns like this one. Drop in the comments. What was the single most powerful idea from this breakdown for you? I read every comment. And if you want to go deeper, read the book. It's one of the best things you can do for your mind. Until next time, take command of your mind. The world will follow.